Hello, we are group four, and we are doing Consuelo Kanaga. Who is this artist? Consuelo Kanaga was born on May 25th, 1894, in Astoria, Oregon. She died in February 28, 1978, at 84 years old. She came from a family that valued ideals of social justice. A small brief look into her life brings us to 1900s. She moved with her family to San Francisco, where she worked for the SF Chronicle as a reporter and feature writer in 1915 to 1918. That's where she learned darkroom techniques from the paper's photographers. 1918 to 1919, she became a staff photographer. 1922, she moved to New York and photographed for the New York American. 1923, she was inspired by Alfred Steinglitz for his periodical camera work, which was fine photography. 1927 to 1928, she moved from Europe to North Africa, then returned to New York, working as a photograph retoucher in the studio and portrait, and and commercial photographer Nicholas Murray, and even reopened her portraiture business. According to the Women's Artist News, Kanaga was not well received until 1974. Now her work is displayed at Metropolitan Museum of Art in MoMA, and two of her photographs are in Edward Steichen's Family of Man.
Next, I'm going to talk about Kanaga's journey into photography and explain how did she come to making photographs. First of all, she didn't study photography in school. She basically educated herself and learned from her coworkers when she worked as a reporter in San Francisco. In 1915, after graduating from high school, she got a job as a reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle. She then befriended the newspaper's camera crew and learned photography skills and darkroom techniques from the newspaper's photographers. Kanaga then went on to work as a reporter and writer for the paper and became a staff photographer. At a time when photography was becoming an established medium, she joined the California Camera Club and met Imogen Cunningham, Edward Weston, and Dorothea Lange, and she became interested in fine art photography in Alfred Stieglitz's camera work. She also established a portrait studio in San Francisco in 1930. Lastly, although she was not an official member of the F-64 group, her work was later exhibited with F-64. And her quote that I would like to share is, "I think that in photography, what you have done is what you have to say." This statement emphasized that there should be a purpose or narrative behind a photograph. What Kanaga means is that the act of taking a picture should be driven by a desire to communicate or express something, be it an emotion, a social issue, an opinion, or a personal experience. It's not just about creating a visually appealing image, but using the visual medium of photography to convey a message or share a part of yourself with the audience.
Did Consuelo work in other media other than photography? Even though writing was a part of Consuelo's beginning, she stayed as a photographer after that. Writing was her anchor to photography, and thanks to that, she was able to meet and learn from other professional photographers. Once Consuelo returned to San Francisco, she made her living as a society portraitist, and here's where she met Tina Modotti, who was a documentary photographer, and she became an early influence for Consuelo. She started her photography career with a fine blend of society portrait and photojournalism as she moved to New York in 1922. After her travels in Europe and North Africa in 1927, she returned to New York City and worked as a photographer retoucher in Nicholas Mirror's studio. Her passion for social issues came to rise, and she started to photograph poverty-stricken families for the New York American. Stiglitz's friendship with Kanaga became stronger as he pushed her to focus on her art. So then this transformed Kanaga's photography into focusing on the immense compassion and sympathy in comparison to just used representations or anonymous portraits in the paper. Four of her photographers were included in the first exhibition of Group F-64 at the De Young Museum in San Francisco in 1932. And what was unusual about this exhibition was she included African American subjects in her work. When another quote that we added was, "When you make a photograph, it is very much a picture of your own self. That is the important thing. Most people try to be striking to catch the eye. I think the thing is not to catch the eye, but the spirit." This quote was said by Kanaga, and she wanted her to work be more feeling rather than a piece of paper. Photography became the only media she focused her career on, and she began to show most of her beliefs and ideas in her work.
Next, we're going to go over the major historical events that affected Kanaga's work. So in the 1920s, the Black Renaissance or the Harlem Renaissance was very popular. This was around the time when Black Americans were migrating out of the South into more northern areas, or what we know now as the East Coast. And Kanaga's work included a lot of subjects that were from the Black American community. One of her most famous subjects is Langston Hughes, a famous Black American writer at the time. The second event that affected her work was the Great Depression. So the Great Depression started in the 1930s when the stock market crashed in October 1929. Since Kanaga was a staff reporter, not a staff reporter, but a staff photographer for the SF Chronicle at the time, she took a lot of portraiture documentary photos of her subjects. So, for example, on the left, you'll see a photo of a mother and her baby that was shot around 1922 to 1924, a little bit before the Great Depression. But you'll notice that she's very good at capturing her subjects with a sense of humanity without demeaning them, despite their situation. And then after the Great Depression, around the 1950s, Kanaga also continued to live a pretty frugal life, depending mostly on her portraiture business.
So I'd be going over question number 5. What techniques and materials did Kanaga use? So techniques and materials used by Kanaga were, she uses a very frequent technique, which is called gelatin silver prints, a popular photographic technique back in the day at that time. Kanaga was well known for her documentary style. She photographed social and cultural shifts from 1920s to 1950s. Kanaga was also well known for her portraits, particularly those of various peoples, artists, and political leaders back at the time. She also worked for FSA throughout 1930 and she helped to chronicle how the Great Depression affected rural America. She gave her photography a humanistic spin by concentrating on the hardships and lives of regular people. The style of her work. She displayed an ever-evolving style that changed with the times and her creative development.
Okay, so I'm going to be going over question 6. Are there any particular images by this artist that are more well known than others, and why? So Kanaga was best known for her portraitures of African Americans. One of her most popular photographs was She is a Tree of Life to Them. This piece gained worldwide recognition because it was displayed in the New York City MoMA. And she became well known for these photos because it was during a time where African American portraits were not commonly on display and used in the context of art. And it was during a time where racism was severe and discrimination practices such as segregation were taking place. A couple of reasons why the photographs of African Americans were quite popular or gained a lot of recognition is because Kanaga was really trying to connect you with the emotions in the photographs. And she did this in a number of ways, one of which was the way she cast light. It would create a dramatic effect that would invoke a lot of emotion. Her photos also show vulnerability, but at the same time show strength. The captions in her photographs were also really a big thing because it kind of guides you on how you should be feeling, because without them, it might be hard to interpret.
Next, we're going to go over why scholars think her work is noteworthy. So, unfortunately, during the early parts of her life, her work wasn't really well known. That's because she did very little self-promoting and she only had a small body of work, which included around 2,500 negatives and 375 prints. However, later on in her life, she was known for having very sympathetic portrayals of her subjects. Again, she was very good at taking portraitures that showed the essence of her subjects, but without demeaning them despite the situation that they were in or despite their place in society. So, again, for example, she shot a lot of subjects that were from the Black American community, and she, again, did very sympathetic portrayals of her subjects. This also includes photos that challenge the idea of race at the time. So next we would like to share a quote with you that's very relevant to her process of doing photography. This quote was specifically written in a letter that was sent to one of her mentors in 1929. It says, "I would sacrifice resemblance any day to get the inner feeling of a person. It seems much more of one than our face, which is so often just a mask. So essentially what Kanaga is describing is she would rather try to capture the inner essence of her subjects instead of trying to capture the resemblance of what her subjects either look like in real life or what her subjects would like to appear to be. Again, her aim is to capture the essence of her subjects.
So why do you think this work is important or noteworthy? So Kanaga was able to create projects that brought a different light to portraiture. She was able to highlight the African American community by taking artistic portraits. And as a white photographer herself, she was able to create propaganda-like portraits during the civil rights movement. Kanaga's work is important because it shows us artists that we are able to voice our message through our work. And in this quote, she states, and from the Yale Review, in all her work, she mined the ordinary for moments of dignity and hope. And then these are our resources. Thank you.